The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 4th chapter. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and he said to him, "All these I will give you if you fall down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. There are many times in people's lives when there are tests. In school, the tests may be about assessing mastery of the material that was supposed to be learned. In various industries, there are tests to make sure that the people are certified for the work that they are about to take on, to make sure that they know the ethical standards, that they know the rules for doing that work. In graduate school, there is typically, towards the end of the instruction time, there is a comprehensive exam that is in part about making sure that there is mastery of the material that was to be learned, but often is also about making sure that the person who is about to graduate has a unified theory for how they do the work that they have been training for. Tests abound in our culture. There are also tests that are more life passage events. Perhaps the most universal of those tests is the driver's license examination. And in that test, we assess whether somebody knows the law well enough to be entrusted with operating a motor vehicle. And then we take them out for a driving test to make sure that they can not only articulate the law and respond to that, but that they can actually do and handle the motor vehicle that we are entrusting to them. It is a bit of a test of maturity as well. Is this one mature enough to be trusted with all that comes with driving it? Of course, there's another point in our lives when there's a test to make sure that the individual should still be afforded the privilege of driving. When the church hears this story of Jesus being tempted in the desert, there is certainly that implication that the temptation for Jesus would be to exploit his position, to exploit the authority that he has been given, to exploit the power that he has for his own self-interest. You see, offering somebody who has been famished the opportunity to turn stones into more bread than he could possibly need, well, that certainly is an invitation to exploit the opportunity for personal gain. offering Jesus the opportunity to test God's protection affords him the opportunity to exploit his privileged position as the Son of God. And offering Jesus that all the kingdoms and dominion over everything, well, that is an invitation to exploit the power that is afforded by the authority that he bears. The temptation is pretty clear. Will this power, will this authority, will this position be exploited for his personal interest or not? It is not dissimilar to what any human is confronted with, that opportunity to use our place for our own personal gain. This time in the desert with Jesus follows directly after his baptism in the story. It is immediately after he hears the words, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." He has just heard a voice from heaven claim him for a very particular role. This move affords him, well, authority and power that is beyond measure. This time in the desert then becomes a test of his readiness. It is not so much about malicious baiting or taunting or even punishment as we sometimes experience our wilderness times. This is more like the traditional vision quest of so many native cultures where a person has opportunity to clarify their identity, to risk cheapening the image. It is kind of like a driving test on steroids. It assesses his readiness for the incredibly important role that he will have. Not long after this time in the desert, he will be confronted with a crowd that needs to be fed, and he will take just a few loaves and feed 5,000. At the end of his ministry, he will come to a place where he will have to trust God. Trust his Father in heaven to care for him, even as he is taunted and he is led to his own crucifixion. And at this time in the wilderness and throughout his ministry, he declines the temptation for political power in the worldly sense, even as he invites and welcomes all who are following him to come and join him, to walk with him, to live into the kingdom of heaven. The stakes are high. For us who follow Jesus, it may be important to remember that when we find ourselves in our own wilderness, our own desert moments of our lives, to ponder how this time might be testing our readiness to live into the fullness of what God calls us to be. That is such a different way of engaging and hearing these temptations. This week in the devotions for Lent that we are reading together as a congregation, the focus has been on the 10 Commandments. Now, some use the commandments to develop rigid rules for living. In reality, the commandments, especially as Jesus articulates and expands them, are not so much about dividing us up, but rather about framing a way of being in relationship. They are about helping individuals and the whole community care for one another. When members use the commandments to exclude and dissociate from others, they are turning the commandments on their head. Yet that temptation to see oneself as particularly righteous, even as we judge others to somehow be morally deficient, using those very same commandments, is this not exploitation of position? Is this not exploitation of authority? Is this not exploitation of power? What I am suggesting is that when we set up standards using biblical principles to judge ourselves better in better light than our neighbors, we risk failing the test of maturity. Such maturity is necessary for living faithfully in community in a way that invites all people into the fullness of the kingdom of heaven that Jesus is offering each one of us. In so many ways, as the Lutheran confessions point out, we will fail to live up to the commandments and the demands that God places upon us. The confessions tell us that the second function of the law is to drive us to our knees, to knowing and understanding our failing, more so, to knowing and understanding our need for God's grace, for God's forgiveness, for God's love. The promise we have from Jesus and his wilderness test is that the one who has maturity is indeed with us. In whatever wilderness experience that we encounter, we are not alone. God, embodied in Jesus Christ, accompanies us, loves us, forgives us, walks with us, reconciles us. That is a promise that we can hold tight as we encounter the tests and the temptations throughout our life.